Welcome to the Pharmacy Podcast Show. You're listening to the first and only podcast dedicated to the business of pharmacy. You can find all of our episodes at pharmacypodcast.com.
Welcome to the Pharmacy Podcast. I'm your co-host in 2017, focused on your career development, Erin Albert. More on me over at my website, erinalbert.com, or let's connect via Twitter. My handle is @ErinLAlbert, or as always, you can join us at Pharmacy Podcast. Today, we're wrapping it up and winding it down on our Back to School RX mini-series. And I really wanted to end the mini-series kind of with the beginning in mind and the end in mind all at once. Today's guest is focused on jobs for those healthcare professionals who want something a little bit off the beaten path, which we think lends very well to graduate school. Dr. Dr Dubois is a veteran of healthcare consulting with McKinsey and Accenture, and today is an entrepreneur on his own with a website called DOCjobscom. I ran across this website thanks to our former fellow, Lauren Steinbach, who I appreciate connecting me to this web portal. And they really offer some unusual career paths for healthcare and life science professionals. Dr. Dubois is actually a medical physician who earned his MD at the Columbia College of Physicians and Surgeons and trained in internal medicine at NYU prior to starting DOCjobs.com, and spent the bulk of his career in healthcare consulting, both with McKinsey and Accenture. Give a listen today, and I really want you to think outside the box when it comes to your own career. And there's some alternatives that we're going to discuss in our conversation that maybe you've never considered for your own pharmacy career. Give a listen to Dr. Dr Dubois. Well, we're with Dr. Dr Dubois today and concluding our Back to School RX mini-series, and he's got a really interesting platform that we're going to do a deep dive into today. So Dr. Dubois, welcome to the Pharmacy Podcast.
Thank you, Erin. Delighted to be here.
So we focus on career development here. This mini-series is definitely focused on that, but we love to start with the question of how did you get to where you are in terms of your career today?
Sure. So I've had an unusual career path, Erin. I'm a physician. I went to medical school at Columbia and trained in internal medicine at NYU. But I've really had about a 20-year career in healthcare startups and consulting firms. So I left the practice fold early in my career, went really straight from medical internship to an internet startup, Medscape. Was there during their IPO, which was exciting. Went to another internet company, which we built, and then had to tear apart and shut down, which was less fun. And I then made my way to McKinsey, and careers are interesting in how they evolve, and not always what you expect. I thought I would spend about 2 years at McKinsey and kind of get back to growth companies, and I wound up having a great time and spent nearly 10 years. I was a partner there, and I got very into health analytics during my time there. So I built and was leading a group called McKinsey Advanced Healthcare Analytics. Then spent about 4 years at Accenture, which is another analytics really is an analytics powerhouse, doing health analytic businesses and building proprietary healthcare analytics at Accenture. And actually just about 2 months ago left there. And I'm now full-time focused on DOCjobs.com, which is, I think one of the topics of our discussion today. So we'll get more into that shortly. So I've had a bit of a winding path, but it's been fun and interesting.
Yeah, it sounds as such. And we'll get into some questions later on about the world of big consulting. But let's back up to DOCjobs.com. Let's talk about it, kind of what the genesis of this site was and what its kind of niche or specialty is and where it's going to move to.
Sure. So DOC, we call it really, but the website is DOCjobs.com or DOCjobs.com if you're just saying it phonetically. Is really a site. It's I think now the premier recruiting site for doctors, scientists, and other biomedical or biomedically educated professionals who are pursuing careers outside of traditional research and clinical tracks. So The site you see today was launched about 2 years ago. It had a quite a long backstory, which I'll get into in just a minute, but it's been in its current form for about 2 years. It really evolved organically. So originally, it was just a networking group that about half a dozen of us from Columbia Medical School who had all gone off to other careers. I was at startups. Some of my classmates were one was at an investment bank, one had done an MBA and was doing other things. Got together for drinks to compare notes on kind of careers outside the traditional track. And about a month or two later, we got together again, and there were now 12 people. We had a brunch a few months after that, and there were 30 people. And so I was doing internet startups at the time, and I put up literally the world's simplest website. It was just sort of a address book of, name, where you worked and where you lived, and how to log in so that we wouldn't all get spammed. And that networking group basically kind of grew by referral as I pursued my career. From the original 6 people to we now have nearly 41,000 members as you look at it today. So along the way, as it grew, employers kind of discovered the group, and many of our members went and got jobs, and then turned around and were looking to hire and would circulate jobs to the group. And so it got big enough that we needed to put it on a real platform. Prior to its current kind of bespoke website that we built out for the purpose, along the way we put it on a sort of rent a social network platform that served its purpose for a while. But so it's really evolved from a kind of local networking group into a recruiting site, because first the members were looking to connect with each other, and then employers are looking to recruit. Really, our niche is people with advanced biomedical education who are interested in an alternate career, or a career outside the traditional, tracks. And that's fairly hard to find through traditional venues. You have to spend a lot of time banging away at LinkedIn to find the MD or pharmacist or, PhD who happens also to want to go into, your career avenue, be that a bank or a pharmaceutical company or what have you.
Yeah, amen to that. And we love focusing on non-traditional career paths, again, with the Pharmacy Podcast here. So can you kind of walk us through some of the types of jobs that you have posted on DOCjobs.com and how it's a little bit different, maybe?
Sure, I'm happy to. And by the way, anyone who's listening can easily see the most recent jobs. If you just go to the website and go to DOCjobs.com and click on the Jobs tab, you'll see all the recent ones. The group grew up in New York, and a lot of our early members went into finance, went to Wall Street. So we've always had a pretty strong vein of Wall Street and generally finance jobs. So equity research positions at investment banks, associate or other level positions at investment funds, venture capital funds, private equity funds, and the like. So we have a pretty, kind of strong vein of finance jobs in general. But we pretty well represent the spectrum of health, the healthcare industry and healthcare jobs. We get a lot of biopharmaceutical companies looking for various types of positions. We increasingly see a lot of startups, health IT, health analytics, telemedicine startups that are looking for all variety of, folks, and obviously looking, for people with biomedical educations. We have hospitals and health plans post for, health plans. We post for medical director, that type of position. Potentially, I would say pharmacists are a important minority of our members. So we're probably not as penetrated for pure pharmacy, like a director of pharmacy at a health plan or something like that. We haven't typically seen, but pretty much the spectrum of jobs you can imagine, in the healthcare industry that would make sense for a biomedical person. Does that answer your question? Anna?
Yeah, absolutely. And so is there, you mentioned this network of over 41,000 members now. Is there kind of a back end of the website where people can, join as a member, or is it just a community? Are there message boards on the site? Can you kind of walk us through verbally what the site has just besides jobs?
Sure. So I'll give you kind of the core features of the site. So there's jobs and job postings, and as a member, you set your criteria, and jobs are emailed directly to you. at least jobs that meet your criteria. You can also see them on the site and apply, directly through the site. That's, one of the core features. The members tab of our website lets you find and message, and obviously people can turn on and off, like on any social network, what kind of messages they want to receive. But you can network and find people directly. We have a forum, which is a pretty active exchange for, people looking for ideas, support, help, thoughts on their career transition, generally. And last, we have a chapters section. So every member, is kind of initially mapped to the state that they joined from, or internationally. We have members from 124 countries now, or to the country. And within those chapters, members can connect with, more easily find folks who are local, in their region or in their state, and also can create events. We really started out of kind of local networking events, and so that's a vehicle by which any member can create an event and invite, folks from their local geography to come meet and network in person.
Sounds awesome.
Those are really the core features of the site.
Yeah, it sounds awesome. So in this Back to School RX mini series that we've been kind of focused on, it's great that you're here at the end to kind of begin with the end in mind, so to speak. Do you have a rough idea of how many professionals in this network that you have built over the years have those kind of dual degree experiences, either that foundation of being a medical doctor in your case, or a pharmacist who then went on to further their education and then subsequently went to the world of big consulting or private equity or venture capital?
Sure. So if you look at our 41,000 members, there's about, we started with medical doctors. We now have about just over 50% of our members, if they call it their kind of primary graduate degree, is a medical MD of some sort. Maybe a DO, and internationally there's some other, some other initials, but essentially medical doctors. 35% have a PhD in something. The remainder would include any other area of biomedical degree, from pharmacist to advanced nursing degrees, to we have a handful of veterinarians, and the like. Across all of that, about 35% of our members have some sort of dual advanced degree. That may be an MBA, that may be an MD, PhD, that may be a PharmD and an MBA, whatever variety of advanced degrees. So there's a pretty large number who've, wound up with multiple degrees, to your original question. And I think that a much larger number than you would find out in the general, population of folks, right? And I think that reflects the fact that we have a membership that is, kind of by definition looking to do something different. And that's been reflected in their educational path as well as their career paths.
Absolutely. So I love the concept of this dual degree being wrapped into something at the end that's more not or less traditional, I guess, more non-traditional. So can you kind of walk us through for some, a pharmacist that's maybe working at Walgreens or CVS, not that there's anything wrong with that, but if they're working, as a retail pharmacist and they've never even heard or met anyone who's worked in big consulting with like a McKinsey or Accenture, walk us through what that type of work looks like.
Sure. So, in general, at any big consultant, and I should say, within consulting, there is a wide range from, I would put both McKinsey and Accenture at sort of, big management consulting firms. There are many, many niche firms that have a very specific focus, whether that's a medical topic or an area of expertise, both within and outside of healthcare. So, beware. I'm talking here about sort of big traditional consulting firms. In general, consulting firms are focused on serving clients, right? And that is generally, the client has an issue, a concern, an area that you are trying to address. It's usually project based. That may be 3 or 4 week project at the short end. That may be, more typically a couple of month project. Or up to a 6-month project. So in working at a consulting firm, you're typically working on a series of projects. And each of those projects is a fairly intense team-based effort, working with a pretty small team. Usually it's a project manager and a couple of associates. and then, one or more partners supervising depending on, what's needed for that particular project. And you work very closely with your clients. Almost all the time you're working, 3 or 4 days a week on site at the client, interviewing clients, gathering their data, kind of getting to the heart of whatever that issue is that you've been, brought to the client to address. And then moving on to the next project, sometimes at that client, sometimes at a different client. So it's a, interesting, fast-paced, tends to have a lot of variety, and your career in consulting can kind of evolve as your interests and, the available work evolve.
And just kind of top line, pie in the sky, what strengths generally do you find in working with really awesome consultants in that particular space? I would imagine they have to be very flexible and very inquisitive. What other kind of strengths do those individuals share in common?
Yeah, good question. I would say for management consulting firms, typically you're going to find people who are and those firms will interview and seek out people who are very strong problem solvers. And that means they are able to take an issue, dissect it into its subparts, figure out how to solve a, ambiguous problem. Usually consultants aren't brought on to solve easy problems. They're brought on to solve, somewhat ambiguous and difficult problems. So, that ability to think in a very structured way about a problem and take it apart and do its sort of component pieces and solve it is definitely a core strength that consulting firms would look for and very specifically interview for. In anyone who's looking into consulting will quickly find that they need to prepare for what are called case interviews, which are kind of mock cases that test for that kind of skill.
Okay.
The second is interpersonal skills. I mean, it's consulting is not something where you're off in a closet just solving a problem. You are very actively engaged with consultants from, the first days, as a junior associate. And so you're engaging clients, you're interviewing clients, you're working with them. Obviously, as your career progresses, you're working with more senior clients and, helping figure out what their issues are and where they have opportunities and where they may need support. But it is, intensely interpersonal and the ability to build relationships and work well with people, both on the client side and within the firm and within teams is critical. I'd say that those are probably the two strongest traits that any firm would look for.
And I'm assuming travel would be a huge component of these particular types of jobs. Is that fair?
Virtually any kind of mainstream consulting firm, you're going to find you're on the road, typically 4 days a week. I mean, the typical model as a team is at the client Monday through Thursday and, back in their home office or home on Friday. It varies a little, depending on the specific project nature of it. But you should definitely assume if you're going to get into consulting that you're going to be traveling heavily.
Great. Well, thank you again, because we don't have many big consultant type individuals on our podcast. So I'm fascinated by this and I really appreciate your insights there. Now, the other area that your website seems to focus on in terms of alternative careers for healthcare professionals who have these additive degrees is this venture capital, private equity type of work. Can you talk a little bit more about what that looks like?
Sure. I would say, and I would maybe expand, by the way, the venture capital, private equity to say, finance jobs in general. There are a lot of positions for folks with advanced biomedical degrees in equity research on the sell side at banks, and then that bleeds pretty seamlessly into what's called the buy side, meaning you're actually doing the investing as opposed to advising the bank's clients on a stock. But either way, I would say increasingly over the last 15, 20 years in the world of biomedical investing, all of those institutions have looked to have people who have deep topical expertise, because if, the simplest examples in pharma, if you're looking at a company that's, got a drug pipeline, drugs in the pipeline, evaluating the prospects for those drugs is a huge swing factor in the value of the company. And evaluating the prospects for a drug to move from, phase 2 to phase 3 is, by definition, pretty technical and medical, right? And I would say, by the way, pharmacists would have a great background to bring to bear on that. but it's, it gets into really understanding the data from the trials and what's going on and what are the prospects. So, and the same would be true of medical devices. The same would be true of, health technology and health IT type companies. Understanding those companies and whether they will or won't make a good investment, really requires understanding the content of what they do. And that's something that, by definition, folks with an advanced biomedical education are pretty well suited to do.
Great. And so what advice would you have for if you rewound and we're talking to a medical doctor just out of residency and fellowship maybe, or a pharmacist who's been in practice in a very traditional setting over the last few years, but has a penchant for business and may be interested in these types of work? Where should they start? What things should they consider? Are
you talking about the finance jobs in particular or alternate careers in general, Erin?
I think in general.
Okay. I think the first thing, Erin, is to figure out what is it you're interested in and what is it you want to do, right? And so, very often people find, so let's take finance jobs for a moment. So many of the finance jobs on our site, and therefore many of the jobs, finance jobs that are recruiting, will ask for a couple of years of experience in finance, right? So you've got a chicken and egg problem. You want,
right.
You want to get into it, but you have the experience. They're looking for the experience. How do I get started, right? And so if you were specifically interested in finance, I would say figure out a way to get some finance experience. Find an entry level job. We have and there are jobs that are entry level and recognize that they're bringing people on and training them. But find a way to get that experience so that you can get yourself started. That's if you were interested in health startups. There's a kind of vibrant economy now of all sorts of startups. Figure out what kind of company you're interested in. Those are probably easier to get into, or to kind of get started. But so the answer really depends. If you're interested in consulting, most of the consulting tends to be at the entry level, just recruiting smart people. As we talked about earlier in the podcast, they're really looking for problem solving skills and interpersonal skills, and they will expect to teach you the kind of craft of consulting. So, of all of these, I would say consulting has a very direct path. They all have very clear application processes. There's some preparation to do around if you haven't come out of business school, where you kind of naturally get prepared for it. Learning about case interviews and the kind of structured interview approach and practicing that. But there's not a kind of prerequisite experience. So say like anything, the answer really depends. First, what is the area that you're most interested in? And then in networking, finding those companies, figuring out, how to get started.
Yeah.
Sorry, a bit vague, but does that answer your question?
Absolutely. And I know it's very kind of vague, and that was intentional because, again, we're trying to tie it back to furthering your education as well. So I think you have to even take a step further back and ask yourself, okay, if this is the type of work I want to do, how am I going to get more education, to your point, let's say, for example, in finance, and that will help position you either inside the classroom or out to move on to one of the unique types of offerings that you have on DOCjobs.com.
Yeah. And by the way, Erin, if I can just jump in, this really goes back to how our kind of group started to begin with, which is, for physicians who are looking to do something outside the traditional track, there was no clear path, right?
Yeah.
So, and I'm sure the same is true, I don't know the pharmacist kind of career paths as well, as I do medical paths, but clearly there's a pretty well-beaten path to be a pharmacist, in a retail store or in a, hospital or various settings. And when you talk about working in startups or consulting or finance or whatever path outside that, it's much murkier, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So that really was the genesis of DOC, was people getting together to, network, to exchange ideas, to compare notes, to figure out the path. And frankly, many of our members over the years have been, you almost virtually see people's eyes kind of go wide open when they realize, oh, they're not the only one who's out there trying to figure this out. There's actually, a whole world of people who are out working in industry, or interested in working in industry. but it's just not as well beaten a path. So you have to discover it a bit yourself.
And last question before we get to the speed round. What triggered you becoming an entrepreneur? And when you went to medical school, did you ever envision yourself as a digital entrepreneur with this website?
Yeah, interesting question. I mean, I was very focused on sort of building new companies throughout my career, new offerings. During med school, that's really when I started being interested in health information. I worked during medical school for the medical informatics department. And so by the time I personally had left medical school, I was sort of focused on how to use technology better to improve medicine. And that kind of defined a lot of my career, initially at internet startups, and then kind of veered hard left into McKinsey, and a much broader view of kind of the health industry. So, I would say for me personally, I've always been focused on either building startup companies, building at both McKinsey and Accenture. I built kind of new offerings. And then DOC really, organically grew out of something that was just initially networking in order to, connect folks. And, I was looking for others who were, pursuing alternate careers or innovative careers, and the other early members were, and that sort of evolved into a group that became a recruiting site. And it's now reached a scale where it really kind of needs and deserves full-time attention.
Yeah, so we're super excited to share your website and resources with our audience because, again, it's really kind of off the beaten path. But Dr. Dubois, share with our listeners where you would like them to connect with you and or your portal and company.
Sure. So the site's easy. It's DOCjobs.com, and you can connect. Takes just a couple minutes to join as a member, which gives you kind of full access to the site. And access to jobs, in your email, and you can tailor your settings and all of that. You can find me personally, on our site for sure. I'm a member, obviously. You can also find me certainly on LinkedIn, Derek Dubois. It's just DEREK DUBOIS, and you'll pretty quickly find me there.
Well, with that, Dr. Derek Dubois, thank you so much for being part of the Pharmacy Podcast and the last speaker on our Back to School RX mini-series.
My pleasure. Thank you, Erin.
All right. Are you ready for our speed round?
Sure.
Okay. What books are you reading right now?
So I tend to read books I tend to read novels and literature and books that are outside of my work content. The last book I read was a book called High Dive by Jonathan Lee, a sort of fictional story, but about the IRA bombing of a hotel in Brighton where Margaret Thatcher was staying. I'm currently reading a book called The Knicks by a guy named Nathan Hill that's sort of a comedy romp. It's a little hard to describe, but it's a fun book.
What's your one word to describe the U.S. healthcare system right now?
The first words that come to mind probably aren't printable or on a podcast. I'll just say misaligned.
If you had to go back to school tomorrow, what would you study?
If I went back to school, I would study, I'd want to read all the great books, and I see that as something I just want to, study philosophy and read books and study the humanities and the world we live in.
And last but not least, what's the best career advice you ever received?
The best career advice I ever received is pretty simple. It was just, this was actually at McKinsey, but I think it applies broadly, which was just, do such good work that everybody wants to work with you.
Well, with that, thank you, Dr. Derek Dubois, for being part of the Pharmacy Podcast.
Erin, thank you. It's my pleasure.
Our conversation today concludes our Back to School RX mini-series. I need to personally thank the following guests who served as part of this mini-series and what I think is one of the best mini-series we've had thus far, focused on your career development. In episode 1, Mr. Peter Dunn, aka Pete the Planner, thank you for sharing your wisdom yet again on the money part about graduate school. In episode 2, we talked to Dr. Katasha Butler about the value of returning to business school and earning an MBA after a pharmacy program. Congratulations to Dr. Shravani Vemreddy and Dr. Prasanthi Patela of IUPUI School of Informatics on graduation this December with their MS in Biohealth Informatics and sharing their wisdom of including informatics as an educational background in addition to being a pharmacist. In episode 4, we went to Paris to talk to AJ Feeney Ruiz, who shared his experience with us. We lived vicariously through him about Le Cordon Bleu and the culinary arts. In episode 5, we talked to Dr. Isaiah Hankel of The Cheeky Scientists and his book, Black Hole Focus, as well as earning a PhD and what you do with that after school. In episode 6, we talked to Mr. George Zorich, appreciate his insights, and his new book, Entrepreneurs in Pharmacy and Other Leaders. And last but not least, today's guest, Dr. Dr Dubois of DOCjobscom, and beginning with the end in mind, what jobs are available for those of us who have multiple degrees who may want something a little bit different in medicine, healthcare, life sciences, and pharmacy. My name is Erin Albert. It's been a true honor providing this mini-series to you. Please let us know if it's been helpful to you. My Twitter handle is @ErinLAlbert, and of course, you can always connect with us at Pharmacy Podcast. Have a great day.